She froze as the sound of ripping silk cut through the bustling terminal. Her elegant black dress, a symbol of her dignity and confidence, was torn apart by a smug TSA agent who grinned as though it were all a joke. The humiliation stung as whispers rippled through the crowd. What the agent didn't know: Gabriella wasn't just anyone. She was married to Marcus Moore, a man who controlled the very airport they stood in. The agent had no idea what storm was about to come his way. Here's the setting the stage section for your script. The morning rush at LAX was in full swing. Travelers hurried through security, the sharp hum of flight announcements blending with the chatter of the crowd. Among the sea of weary faces and bustling footsteps, Gabriella Moore stood out. Her floor-length black gown hugged her figure with effortless grace, the delicate fabric catching the light as she moved. It wasn't loud or ostentatious, just refined elegance that turned heads as she passed. Gabriella wasn't merely a passenger. She carried herself with the poise of a woman who knew her worth. Her husband, Marcus Moore, was a powerful entrepreneur, a man whose influence reached far beyond the walls of this airport. But Gabriella wasn't one to flaunt her status. She had always believed that respect was earned, not demanded. Today, however, none of that mattered. As she approached the TSA checkpoint, Gabriella noticed a middle-aged agent with a uniform that strained against his shoulders. His sharp gaze lingered on her a moment too long, his expression smug as though he had already decided she was his next target. Something felt off. The air around her shifted, and Gabriella couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be far from an ordinary day at the airport. As Gabriella stepped forward at the TSA checkpoint, her unease grew. The agent, with his smug grin and scrutinizing stare, was clearly sizing her up. His demeanor radiated a sense of petty power, and it was directed squarely at her. "Take a side, ma'am," he said abruptly, his tone cold and commanding. "We'll need to do a more thorough check. That dress looks expensive." Gabriella raised an eyebrow, her calm exterior masking the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "It's just a dress," she replied evenly, though the way his eyes lingered made her stomach churn. The agent ignored her response and began rifling through her belongings with exaggerated slowness, taking his time as though relishing the control. Gabriella clenched her fists but stayed composed. She had dealt with worse. Then, without warning, he grabbed the hem of her dress. "What are you doing?" Gabriella gasped, stepping back instinctively. But it was too late. With a swift motion, the delicate fabric tore, the sound of ripping silk cutting through the terminal like a knife. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and heads turned to watch. The agent stood there, smirking. "Oops," he said mockingly. "Guess it wasn't as sturdy as it looked. Not worth that much after all, huh?" Gabriella froze, the humiliation washing over her. The once elegant gown now hung in tatters, exposing her to the judgmental stares of strangers. Some looked on with pity, others with amusement. Her voice trembled as she managed to say, "Are you serious?" The agent shrugged, his smirk widening. "Hey, sometimes things get rough. Not my fault your dress was fragile." "Oh, my fault, man, I couldn't hold back." Gabriella's heart pounded, her blood boiling beneath her calm exterior. This wasn't just a tear in her dress. It was a blatant act of disrespect, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Bear nodded and placed the creds back in the bag, his hand remaining on hers. Gabriella stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. The stares from the crowd were suffocating, some filled with pity, others with cruel curiosity. Her once pristine dress, now torn and ruined, hung as a stark symbol of her humiliation. But beneath the embarrassment, anger brewed. This wasn't just about a ripped dress. It was about the blatant disrespect, the condescension, and the unspoken prejudice that she had seen before. She wasn't going to let it go. Pulling out her phone with shaking hands, Gabriella dialed Marcus. Her husband answered immediately, his voice steady. He hurried to stand, walked to the window, and looked out. "What's wrong, Gabriella?" Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to stay composed. "A TSA agent. He tore my dress, right here, in front of everyone. And then he laughed, Marcus. He treated me like I was nothing." The line went silent for a moment, but Gabriella could feel the shift. Marcus's tone dropped to a level she rarely heard. A mix of controlled fury and unyielding determination. "Stay where you are," he said firmly. "I'm on my way." As the call ended, Gabriella looked around, her chin lifting slightly. She wouldn't let this moment define her. She paced near the checkpoint, trying to suppress the boiling rage. Her mind replayed the agent's words. "Not my fault your dress was fragile." The smirk, the tone, the blatant disregard, it all gnawed at her. Just as her thoughts threatened to spiral, an older woman approached her, a soft voice cutting through the haze. "Baby girl, I saw what happened," she said, her kind eyes filled with empathy. "You didn't deserve that. Don't let anyone make you feel less." The woman's words, simple yet profound, struck a chord. Gabriella blinked back tears and nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't alone. This wasn't just about her. It was about standing up for herself and anyone else who had ever been treated as less than they deserved. The faint sound of footsteps pulled her focus. Marcus was coming, and she knew he wouldn't just stand by. Justice was about to arrive. Gabriella's heart raced, not just with anger but with a deep, simmering resolve. She stood near the security checkpoint, her torn dress still drawing stares from passers-by. Their eyes, some filled with pity, others with quiet judgment, felt like daggers, but Gabriella refused to crumble under the weight of their gaze. This wasn't the first time she had felt the sting of humiliation. Over the years, she had learned to navigate the unspoken biases, the subtle dismissals, and the outright condescension that came with being a confident woman of color. But today, this act of blatant disrespect wasn't just personal, it was public. The sound of the agent's mocking words echoed in her mind. "Oops, guess it wasn't worth that much." It wasn't just a comment about her dress, it was a statement meant to diminish her worth. But Gabriella wasn't someone who would let others define her value. As she paced, an unexpected voice broke through her thoughts. "Baby girl," the older woman said, stepping closer with a warm yet resolute tone. "I saw what happened. You didn't deserve that. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I didn't, I think that was... Gabriella turned, her eyes meeting the kind, understanding gaze of the stranger. There was something maternal in her expression, a quiet strength that reminded Gabriella of her own grandmother. "I've been through it too, sugar," the woman continued. "Don't let these fools get to you. If you need a witness, I'm here. You're not alone in this." Gabriella felt a lump rise in her throat. In the middle of her humiliation, this stranger's words lit a spark of hope. It wasn't just about the dress. It was about dignity, resilience, and refusing to be silenced. As Marcus's voice crackled through her phone, promising swift action, the spark turned into a flame. Gabriella lifted her chin, her determination burning brighter than ever. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, and she was ready to claim it. Gabriella's hands trembled slightly as she ended the call with Marcus. The unwavering intensity in his voice had reignited her own sense of resolve. She wasn't standing alone in this moment. Marcus was coming, and he would ensure the situation was dealt with swiftly and decisively. The stares from the crowd felt less suffocating now, their whispers less piercing. Gabriella focused on the rhythm of her breathing, her anger no longer a chaotic storm but a steady, driving force. This wasn't just about her dignity. It was about ensuring no one else endured what she had. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Then, the unmistakable sound of polished shoes striking the tiled floor echoed through the terminal. Gabriella turned to see Marcus striding toward her, his sharp suit and commanding presence parting the crowd like a wave. His gaze was locked on her, his jaw set tight. Gabriella felt her shoulders relax slightly, the weight of the moment less heavy now that he was here. "Gabrielle," Marcus said, his voice firm but tinged with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady. "But this? What he did? It's not okay." Marcus's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the checkpoint. Without waiting for another word, he turned and marched toward the TSA supervisor. The energy in the room shifted as Marcus approached, his presence commanding attention from everyone nearby. Gabriella followed close behind, her resolve now bolstered by his unwavering support. This wasn't just a confrontation, It was the start of justice being served. Marcus stormed through the security area like a force of nature, his sharp suit and piercing gaze enough to make heads turn. The chatter in the terminal quieted as his commanding presence filled the space. Gabriella followed closely behind, her torn dress a visible symbol of the humiliation she had endured. The TSA supervisor, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard in hand, straightened up as Marcus approached. Her professional demeanor faltered when she saw the cold fury in his eyes. "You," Marcus barked, pointing directly at her. "I need a word. Now." The supervisor blinked, startled by the intensity of his voice. "Sir, what seems to be the issue?" Marcus didn't mince words. "Your agent tore my wife's dress. In public. Humiliated her in front of a crowd. And then had the audacity to laugh about it. You think that's acceptable?" The supervisor's face turned pale as her gaze flickered to Gabriella. The torn fabric and the fire in Gabriella's eyes left no room for doubt. This was serious. "Sir, I wasn't aware," the supervisor stammered. "Of course you weren't," Marcus snapped. "But you're aware now, and here's what's going to happen. That agent is going to be fired. Today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. And my wife is getting a public apology." Gabriella stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "This isn't just about me. It's about respect. For every traveler who deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are." The supervisor nodded quickly, her hands trembling slightly. "Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure this is handled immediately." Marcus's voice lowered, but the power behind his words remained. "And while you're at it, take a hard look at your entire department. There's no place for people like that agent in a professional setting. Not here, not anywhere." The agent, who had been trying to disappear into the background, was now the center of attention. His earlier smugness was replaced with visible discomfort as the crowd murmured their disapproval. Gabriella met his eyes, unflinching. If he thought he could intimidate her, he was wrong. She had faced worse than this, and she wasn't backing down. The room felt charged, the tension thick as the supervisor called security to escort the agent out. Justice wasn't just demanded, it was being served, right there in the middle of the terminal. Minutes later, the disgraced TSA agent was escorted out of the terminal, his face a mix of shame and disbelief. The crowd, which had been quietly watching, erupted into murmurs of approval. Gabriella stood tall, her shoulders back and her chin lifted. The torn dress that once symbolized her humiliation now represented her strength and resilience. Marcus turned to the airport spokesperson who had arrived to address the situation, a clipboard clutched tightly in their hands. "This isn't over," Marcus said, his voice calm but resolute. "An apology isn't enough. I expect this story to be made public, and I want your department to issue a statement ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else." The spokesperson nodded quickly, their expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "We'll take immediate action, sir. You have our word." Gabriella stepped forward, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "Make sure you do," she said, her eyes sharp. "This isn't just about me. It's about every traveler who has ever been disrespected. This ends here." As the crowd began to disperse, Gabriella and Marcus walked out of the terminal together. Marcus placed a comforting hand on her back, his voice softening. "You handled that beautifully." Gabriella gave him a small smile, her confidence fully restored. "We handled it together. Thank you for having my back." By the end of the day, the incident made headlines. News outlets reported on the TSA agent's dismissal and the airport's public apology. The story went viral, becoming a powerful reminder that disrespect, no matter how small, has consequences. Gabriella sat at home that evening, scrolling through messages of support pouring in online. She wasn't just the woman in the torn dress anymore. She had become a symbol of resilience and justice. As Marcus leaned over, wrapping his arms around her, he whispered, "You've always been a force to be reckoned with." Gabriella smiled, leaning into him. "And now the world knows it too."